Hello there. Welcome
Howdy.
to welcome to everybody, not just the men, but the women and the children too. Uh, um, welcome to episode 6 of the Owl Man.
Oh yeah.
We had a fun final week loaded with lots of interesting games, although, well, I felt like this week was pretty good with a balance of upsets and predictable matches, and APAC
I
being
thought
extremely backloaded, right?
it was all super easy to predict. I called every little bit of it.
And
And
I don't know. You called a Spitfire beating Glads, and that didn't happen. But I'll give you credit for the
but
Atlanta pick.
Spitfire did beat
You
Atlanta.
I'll give you the
And
credit on
so
that one. But
yeah.
it was a great week and final week of the Kickoff Clash. So now we have all the how many teams? 12 teams, 4 in APAC, 8 in NA. That we know who's going to be playing, at least in the NA side in Dallas, playing in-person LAN events. Woo!
Oh yeah.
Get hype. LAN events. But before we get into the matches, we had a community update this past week, giving us some updates on some goings ons, right?
About time.
So they mainly what it was they just gave us updates about midseason madness and how COVID is messed with it. So they're going back to Hawaii. Yay, Hawaii! I understand why they're going. It just kind of sucks.
Yeah. But it makes sense. I mean, it's better that than just canceling it altogether. And so,
Well, they wouldn't have canceled it, but Reinforce had a tweet where he said they should have just cut the losses and just made the midseason tournament separated region based so they could have LAN events on the NA side of things. Which, I mean, I guess at that point your thought process of would you rather have international competition or LAN events? And I guess for the health of the league, international competition is good, but for the viewer, LAN events are better. So like you can't win them all.
Yeah, I think I personally I definitely prefer keeping things international. If anything, just to let you see where the regions stack up and stuff, especially halfway through the season. I think it's really good. I watch a lot of League of Legends, and they just finished their mid-season tournament for the world, and that was pretty awesome. And I think anything that you bring together multiple regions really helps you see how the different regions stack up. And so I think it's a good thing.
That's fair. So they'll just be the NA teams will be going to Hawaii like they did last season for the midseason tournament. And then they also announced that because they have that extra NA has to travel to Hawaii, they'll have that bye week, obviously. But then last year, the NA teams brought up the fact that, they have to spend a week traveling, whereas the APAC teams are able to practice for the tournament. So they, in order to help make it fair, the APAC teams won't start their midseason madness qualifiers until a week after the NA teams do, so that the NA teams will finish and then they'll have their travel week, and the APAC teams will be finishing their final matches in order to make sure there's no unfair, advantage given to the APAC teams for practice. So I'm glad that they did that. So there's
I think it
a balance
still slightly favors APAC just because they are playing up until right before. But I like that they're willing to make changes to try to address these issues.
Yeah, those are good. It's good that they've done that. And then they also announced how the patches will change, which, I mean, they announced what we basically already knew, or I guess figured, that the patches will change with each of the tournaments. So the midseason madness will be played on the patch that came just before the beta ended. So they'll be playing on the one where Zenyatta has like the Sparta kick and Mercy's super jump, and then the soldier nerfs and the sojourn buffs.
Sojourn buffs. Yeah.
So we may see more sojourn. We'll see what that actually does for the midseason madness and what that might do for the meta.
I think it'll be interesting to see if it drops Soldier out of the meta, because he's been pretty dang dominant.
I would love to see Sojourn played other than Leave picking her in overtime. That's the only Sojourn play that we've seen, is Leave just coming out with the emergency Sojourn in overtime.
Which is kind of a weird emergency pick in my mind.
Emergency pick, yeah. I don't know.
I guess it is what it is.
They also talked about how the winners of the Summer Showdown, Kickoff Clash, and Midseason Madness will get a remix of the Luchador Reaper skin with their team color variations. Here are the examples. So we didn't get like a terribly large amount other than them just telling us that Midseason Madness is not going to be a LAN event, which is disappointing, but I understand why they had to do it because China has some really strict policies in place for COVID. I'm hoping that that doesn't affect postseason stuff. I know that it was tweeted out that they are still trying to push for in-person LAN playoffs and grand finals, so hopefully that is able to come through because those are big end of season stuff. But it was it was good that we got those updates, so we at least know what to look forward to for the Midseason Madness. Them going to Hawaii. But enough about that update. Let's actually get
enough about the boring stuff. Let's talk about the games.
Talk about the games.
Let's start with APAC. I want to talk about.
Of course,
APAC.
Let's talk about APAC. Let's talk about the feel-good story of the week. Why don't we?
And was that?
That's
the fusion make us look like idiots?
What? No. It's
okay. Valiant got their first win.
Dia getting his first ever full contribution Overwatch League win. Because technically he did play in a match in which the Dragons won in 2019, but he played for one map and it was a draw. And he wasn't like a starter for that match. So this is like his first win as a full-time starter for a team, which is crazy. You look back to that 2018 Dragons roster and Dia, that man's got the mental of. It's just unbreakable. You can't break this man's mental, especially losing 3-2 to the best APAC teams in Dynasty, Shanghai, and Hangzhou. Valiant they deserve that win though. I mean, they 23 losses in a row, over 630 some odd days since their last win. But crazy. We figured that it would come eventually though, because even though they were winless up until their win against Chengdu, they were looking good. And I mean, they did take basically what is essentially the three best APAC teams to map 5. So they just had problems finishing out the series. They'd go up 2-1 and then just couldn't take the last map. So they
that was
looked
one
really good.
thing that we talked about even coming into this season is this team a top APAC team? No, but are they a reasonably solid team that could get some wins here and there? Yeah, and I think they proved it this week. I thought they won against Chengdu, and it was a pretty good win too. It was a solid 3-1.
And it was interesting because Valiant play a version of the Zarya comp that I don't really think any other team does, because they bring in innovation a whole lot to play the Mei Zarya kind of comps. And they'd have Becky sometimes do it, but Sasha looks comfortable on the Zarya, which I mean, he's an off-tank player, so obviously he's going to. So I think that it's a good look for Valiant, making their own style of the Zarya rush with the Mei instead of the Reaper. Sometimes they put Becky on the Echo. They would do what the Spark do when they put Alpha Yi on the Echo, and they also look good doing that. But it's just good to see them finally get a win. They definitely worked for it, and Dia more than anybody deserved it. And also he tweeted out today, or maybe it was yesterday, how his girlfriend accepted his proposal. So not only does Dia get his first full starter Overwatch League win, but he also is going to join the married man meta.
I've just gotta say, I think there's kind of a correlation there. He gets his first win, she says yes. I think he's been waiting for an answer for ages, but she wanted to make sure he was a winner.
She's I can't marry, I can't commit to a loser. You have to prove you're a winner first.
And then finally he came out, won a map. I mean, won a match, and she said yes. I think it's related.
That's I suppose, but they just looked good. But then, because they beat Hunters, and even though they lost to Charge last week, Valiant definitely are not the worst team in APAC. In fact, I don't even think they're the second worst team in APAC. I would look at them in that fifth place slot, underneath the other 4 that have qualified for the Kickoff Clash, because they look solid. Because Chengdu looks always, you never really know what you're going to get out of Chengdu, and then Guangzhou, as we talked about last week, is just kind of there. They're choice 01, but then otherwise they're just there. Whereas Valiant, when Valiant plays, you actually want to watch Valiant play. But then all things considered, when you look to NA, it's like when you know that NYXL or Vancouver are playing, you're like, great, let me just tune this match out. I'm not going to actually watch it. Whereas in APAC, even if Guangzhou are the ones playing, you're like, I don't mind watching Guangzhou play because maybe they can pull an upset or something. I think that's what makes APAC so interesting this year, is that all of the teams are somewhat competitive. There's a chance for upsets, whereas you go to NA and it's like Vancouver's going to do a whole lot of nothing. You don't really care to watch those bottom teams. And even though like London and Boston have leveled up recently, I don't like, it's not the same. NA doesn't feel the same as APAC.
Yeah, there's a clear separation in NA between the top, like 5-6 teams or so and everyone else.
Mm-hmm.
The East, APAC, it's like anyone could take games off of anyone, and yeah, I agree. It's pretty dang interesting to watch. Speaking of interesting to watch, our sponsor of the week,
gosh, Dave,
is something you'll have to wait for. Philadelphia Fusion
is not our sponsor. Let's not confuse that.
Yeah, not our sponsor.
Not sponsored by Philadelphia Fusion.
Sponsor later. Not sponsored, and even if we were, that's not going to protect them from this next bit.
Oh my goodness.
It was tragic. Remember last week we were talking about the Fusion, and both of us were like,
as the best team
all
potentially
the
in the
teams
world.
are good, but they're miles above everyone else.
They are miles above.
And then they come out
and
just get wrecked this week, and it was really not good.
Losing 3 out of your last 4 matches after 3-0ing the Shanghai Dragons doesn't look great. But I mean, granted, like they played decent teams in Seoul and Hangzhou. So, I mean, their loss to Seoul, they just got diffed pretty hard. Seoul, I mean, that was just kind of unlucky. Seoul looks on another level when they're clicked. And even the Spark match, it was kind of unlucky. They had a lot of like spaghetti droppage and like multiple C9s. Then there was like that fight on Route 66 at the end where they had 4 ults going into it and just whiffed somehow. And they would just randomly do some dumb stuff in that match. So the Hangzhou match, they kind of let it get away from them. The Seoul match, they just kind of got hard diffed. But the Chengdu match was just weird because unlike the Hangzhou and Seoul matches where it's like, okay, I would think that those teams are at the same level, if not better than Philly, I was not thinking Chengdu was going to be able to take down Philly, especially in the way that they did. Because I mean, Jinmu, first of all, Jinmu was like having the game of his life on Genji, and then they were also doing a really good job at shutting Zest down, and Belisarea was getting outplayed by Gaga. So Fusion just kind of were outclassed by Chengdu in that one-off. And that's like part of the weirdness of Chengdu is they can just randomly decide they want to play really well, and then the next week, then the next day, they just go and lose to Valiant.
Yeah.
So you know.
Yeah, but still, I think if anything, it just shows how close APAC is. You know, the fact that Fusion, week 1, they look like the most dominant team. No one can beat them. And now they're sitting 4th in the standings. Like, I think it just shows, like, how close this region is. And it's going to be really interesting to see as it evolves what happens. And I think that also means that, and I know we aren't talking about the Kickoff Clash yet, but I think it just shows how interesting it's going to be seeing, you know, which of these 4 teams comes out on top, because I think it's anyone on their best day is
yeah. A lot of APAC is like that. Even like Guangzhou, even the Charge to an extent, where all of them have hot and cold moments. And with the Fusion, it looks like they just, when they're off it, they look like sometimes they have some coordination issues, or aim gods just kind of getting bullied and singled out. But on their best day, when Zest is able to just be the freak of nature that he is, or when MN3 is feeling right, they're able to be, you know, competitive with even when they weren't feeling great, they were still competitive with Spark. So I wouldn't, even though they did finish 3-3 now, I don't think that they're on the same level as Spark, Seoul, and Shanghai. but I would definitely still say they will always be competitive. They just looked, they beat themselves this week is what it was. There was just a lot of unforced errors that happened throughout all of their matches, and then they were just getting unlucky with some of the matchups that they ended up facing. But
and really, we've known this about some of these players. That's one thing about the Fusion is they have players that like are just not always the most consistent. One of those being Carpe, which I feel like, I've always seen him as a player that when he pops off, he's, as good as anyone. But when he isn't on fire, then he's just getting diffed.
And then they also have a team of rookies who are still learning how to like show up in those crunch time, high pressure scenarios instead of just dropping the ball like they did as a team these last couple matches. So I think just with more time, more experience, the team will gel a little better, and we'll be able to see a more consistent high end Fusion and not the loses to Chengdu Fusion.
Yeah, and so that's that. I think another team worth talking about this week is definitely Shanghai. Didn't really talk about them much last week.
Well, I mean, when you get bodied 3-0, and you're the defending champions, it doesn't look too great, but
they looked really okay last week. And then this, I mean, like a week and a half ago.
They looked really
this last
okay.
Weekend, just really okay.
Really
but this last weekend, they looked beautiful. They looked amazing.
Well,
they looked like the Shanghai Dragons.
They needed some time to warm up though, because having to go to 5 maps against Charge and Valiant doesn't look great.
We don't talk about that.
But then, then they just kind of then they went to 5 against Spark as well last week.
Yeah.
But then they come this week and then they just kind of walk all over the Seoul Dynasty, who were looking fantastic leading up to this. So it's just Shanghai looked like they just needed time to get to level up a bit. They were just getting better and better with each match, and they put the beat down on Prophet, who was like popping off in the match, but they just said no, go down. We're the real kings of APAC. They just had some growing pains probably.
Well, and it makes sense. Like I feel like if any team was to come out and figure things out, it was going to be Shanghai, because like they have players that know how to win. And so I think, it took them a few matches to figure it out, but I think from now on we're going to continue to see a dominant Shanghai.
Shanghai will continue to evolve, and it's awesome seeing Who Are You play like he's in Apex, like it's 2017 again. Like he's single-handedly carrying fights on the back of his Genji. I feel like Shanghai is really relying on that, which there's nothing wrong with that. When you've got a Genji as consistent as Who Are You, you're able to do that sort of thing, and they're still just super clutch. Like even though they had to go to map 5 3 times, they're still winning those map 5s, unlike other teams who aren't able, who like Valiant, who went to map 5 3 times and lost every time. Shanghai are able to, they're just experienced. They know how to play in those high pressure map 5 situations. And I think they're just going to be able to keep getting better and better. And I would definitely say that after, even though like Spark are also 5-1, I would say that Shanghai are probably the favorites of APAC and the favorites to win Kickoff Clash, just because they looked better and they aren't losing 5-map series. Their one loss was just kind of a irregular boomage, just kind of like how the Dallas Fuel had week 1, just kind of getting 3-0'd by a team that wasn't expected to be amazing. But then they leveled up just like Fuel has, which is good. Maybe not to the same extent that Fuel has, but getting to the right peaks where they need to get to. Yeah,
it'll be really interesting to see how they play this week for the tournament, because I think that will be the big decider. I think 2 weeks in, it's hard to say for sure what the identity of these teams is really going to be.
Yeah, after 6 matches in 2 weeks, it's kind of like
because if you have 1 week that we have some struggles, and then another week where you're looking really strong, I feel like you need a 3rd week to kind of cement your place, and so for these APAC teams, that's going to be the Kickoff Clash. And so I think going into the tournament, it's hard to say for sure who the favorite is. I think Shanghai have a good argument. I think Seoul have an argument to be made. I mean, of course they lost to
They
Shanghai,
just lost.
but Shanghai just got destroyed by Fusion, just a week ago. So
Well, yeah, but I mean they're on a 5-match win streak. That I mean they haven't looked back since that loss. Whereas all the other teams in APAC have had a blip or two in the last couple matches. Whereas Spark having to take 5 to take down Fusion, or getting beat by Shanghai last week. Charge getting run over this way, that way. Seoul getting beat down by Shanghai. Whereas Shanghai is coming in probably with the highest momentum out of all the APAC teams into the tournament. But Spark are right there with them, because I mean their loss came last week, but they didn't win 4 matches in a row in the week before. They didn't play, they didn't win. They're on the same win streak as Shanghai is. So I think that's what gives Shanghai probably the edge, is they just have that. They're just consistently getting better, and we know that they're just going to get better. Whereas with Spark, we know they're a strong team. We just, sometimes they have to figure some things out.
Yeah, it'll be interesting, and we'll definitely have to talk more about this. But before we do,
oh boy.
Are you ever just sitting at your desk?
No.
And you're just like, man, watching the Spitfire take a loss against the Gladiators just isn't worth watching. And so you start to stare off into space. Well, I've got something new for you to stare out at. Fake potted plants.
Wait a minute.
This thing is amazing. It's fake. You don't have to water it. You don't have to take care of it, but it looks pretty. Potted plants. Our sponsor.
This is my life now.
Speaking of my life now, man, in your face, Spitfire, while we're on the subject.
Well, in your face too, though, because I mean, when we were watching, right? Ryan, Gator tweets out before the match. He goes, "Hottie, you want to have a respectable Rhine duel?" And I went, "Oh, we're gonna see the Rhine mirror." And you told me, "Oh, Atlanta wins that." That's not what happened.
I didn't say that.
You definitely did.
We don't have footage of that, but we do have footage of me talking about how the Spitfire were going to take down Atlanta, and you were like, "Oh, there's no way that happens." In your face. It was glorious. It was amazing. Spitfire are dominant. I think they're a top 5 team in... No, I don't think that.
Well,
I know for a fact. I know for a fact they are better than half the teams in the league.
That's not a top 5 team, though.
They're better than more than half of the teams in the league.
No, I would say that the majority of APAC teams would dump on London.
Yeah, true.
But they
maybe.
What was interesting about London is even though they lost to Glads, it looked competitive.
They looked good.
But
they looked really
part of that did have to do with Glads trying to be a little cute playing comps they'd never practiced. Doomfist, if played aggressively and correctly, I think does work really well against the London comp. We saw that from the Outlaws last week, but Glads never would play Doomfist. So them just suddenly trying to play it doesn't... The comp is only good when you play it correctly. And the problem with the Rain is that the Rain don't play an aggressive Doomfist, so they just kind of get walked over. And then they tried to mirror the Reinhardt, and they don't know how to play the Reinhardt comp. So London just has the advantage, and they just got rolled.
Which... I thought London had a really good week. I think even, like you said, game they lost, they still looked competitive. And Glads ran some weird stuff. But either way, I don't think coming into the season, anyone would have expected the Spitfire roster in any world to be competitive with the Glads roster. Or
even the Rain roster.
Or the Rain roster. And so I think the fact that London can not only compete with these teams, but take down Atlanta, I think it just shows that London is better than some people thought they would be this year.
Well, everybody. I don't even. You
Yeah,
didn't
that's
even
true.
think
I
London
don't.
would be.
No,
We
I
all
don't think
thought they were
anyone
like
put
12th, 13th, bottom double
Yeah,
digits,
that's true.
and
But
they've just picked their own style and
yeah,
and stuck with
and
it.
they've stuck with it. I think Hottie is like hard carrying, but he's playing. I mean, we've talked about this before. He's like today's bumper,
Very
where
much so.
he just he
He just goes.
charges in, goes in, runs in,
Sends it
and
full send into the
survives
back
because
line.
Admiral and Landon just support him. And that being said, I will say Sparker looked insane this week.
Sparker was doing wonders on the Soldier.
He had really good week on Soldier, and I think that is definitely worth pointing out. But yeah, I think overall London looked really good. This
London
week.
looked good against even Glads, and Atlanta just. I mean, they took maps from them, but like they mainly were taking maps when Spitfire weren't able to play the Rhine comp, because as good as Spitfire are at that rush comp, as soon as they have to start playing that Winston dive, suddenly they come back down to earth a little bit, and now they start looking not the greatest.
And I think that's the thing about Atlanta this week. They lost both of their games, and pretty like it was pretty clear the whole time that like. I mean, London looked better against the Glads than Atlanta looked against the Glads. Like,
yeah,
pretty significantly.
Atlanta
I
this
think
week looked
the rain have
out of
just
it.
been figured out. It looks like they just can't play against the they can't play against the Reinhardt. And they can't play as the Reinhardt.
It's hilarious that they can't, like, they lose to London in the way they do, and then they come into the Glads match the next day, and the Glads map one come marching out on the Reinhardt. Oh, yeah. And as soon as Glads, who never have played the Rhine Rush, come out and run circles around the rain on it, from as soon as you just saw that comp come out, you're like, oh, it's over. It's over. Atlanta's done.
Well, and we were just talking about how the Glads didn't look very good on Rhine going against Spitfire. But
well,
then
they didn't look good on Doom.
Or yeah. Sorry.
They didn't try and play Rhine because they just don't play Rush. I genuinely think that the Glads went, oh, we're playing Atlanta. Oh, they just lost to London. Here, let's do the same thing that Atlanta did. Because it was funny because Gator tweeted after the match, he's like, I'm tired of all these teams playing cheese comps, and it's like, well, I mean, you're the ones that didn't want to scrim London more often, which on the topic of the scrims, go ahead first.
I was just going to say, the way I see it is, if you can't play, like, the whole point is to win games, and so if you can win games, it doesn't matter what comp you're running.
Mm-hmm.
If it counters the enemy team. So if Atlanta is complaining like, oh, London's playing a team comp that we don't know how to play against, well, learn how to play against it. Yeah. You know, if they can get away with that, if they can play a so-called cheese comp and get away with it, then maybe you're not playing to the high. Maybe you aren't playing the right.
Just
comp.
don't get
maybe
cheese,
London is.
forehead. It's that easy. It's like,
well, the big thing is be better.
It's 20. This pin from Reiner on the end of Q Queen Street, where he just gets booped around the corner and just it's just such a fun. It's literally, it was an embodiment of Hottie right there. But it's like 2019 Chengdu, right, where Chengdu was playing comps that nobody cared to practice, but they were beating on teams that weren't as good at goats. And I think London is the same way currently. Is they are going to beat teams that aren't really good at the Winston comps or at the Doom comps or the Rhine, any one of the comps. If a team isn't really good at one of them, London is going to beat them because nobody knows how to play against the Rhine comp. But I mean, on another note, like the idea pushed by Hottie a little bit on broadcast that Atlanta blacklisted them from scrims, and it turns out it's just a big misunderstanding. But us as the community, we're like, no, we like the narrative. We want to believe.
It's such a hilarious narrative. Like, I know it's not true, but if it were to be true, funny. It's so beautiful, the fact that they won that. But yeah,
Atlanta just look out of it, and I worry about them going into the Kickoff Clash, where their mental state is going to be at, because I mean, towards the tail end of that Glads match, and even in the after map 1, you could tell that they were like, they were just done. They just didn't, and you could hear it in Gator's voice, like when they were picking in the selection, the team selection for the Kickoff Clash bracket. Like when Gator was talking, he was like, he just didn't want to be there. And I worry for Atlanta going in that they're just mentally going to be out of it. Because I mean, they aren't playing Glads round 1. Unfortunately, would have been hilarious, but I think they need to get their heads back into the game, because they this weekend just looked, they just didn't want to be there.
Yeah, I think it's really tragic that Atlanta and Washington are going to the tournament and London
not
isn't.
London
Because
and
the
Boston.
thing about London, well, and Boston, is both of those teams are hype enough, and sure, like, would they take any games off of some of these other teams? I don't know.
They
I don't
take
think
maps,
so.
maybe.
But they take maps, and I think the big thing is they're excited and they look it. And I think Atlanta, especially Atlanta, just doesn't look like they're into
it's
it.
unfortunate
and at this point, it's just
that they weren't able to make it in. But London looks better
yeah.
for moving forward towards the rest of the season.
And I think mid-season is a possibility. You know, if Atlanta keeps falling down and London and Boston keep going up, like, there's always a chance that those teams can make a comeback.
So they looked good, but then another middle of the pack team that came out this week and looked like much worse than they really should have. I don't know what the Outlaws were doing against the Eternal. Like, yeah, they won, but you shouldn't have to reverse sweep what is probably the 12th worst team in the league. You shouldn't have to do that, Outlaws. What are you doing? Stop it. Get some help. Well, but what made it even worse though was like the stuff before the match, right? The Outlaws had their like video, and Pelican says that he would rather play ranked than play the Eternal.
and then they get
nearly lose.
First.
Like,
yeah,
the Outlaws are the kings of heavily trash talking and then just losing. Like, they did it last year against Washington. They just can't. It always worries me when this was said, and like coming into the match, you're like, oh, Outlaws got this 3-0, 3-1 at worst, and then they go down 2-0, and I think the biggest problem that the Outlaws had this weekend was obviously that they tried picking up the Zarya comp, and obviously it's like that match, it's not like they probably weren't practicing it for the week, but they had never played it in a match as extensively as they did this week, and they did not look great on it. I mean, they looked better as the series progressed, but they didn't look that. I mean, it was kind of it was very poor. Some poor Zarya Reaper comp gameplay.
That being said, I think if there were to be a match that you could try something just to, you know, see how it goes down in a real game, I think going against Paris is the time to do it. So I don't think that this match is representative of, you know, who Houston is going forward. I think Houston's still trying to find their identity, because I think, you know, the Dante Doomfist is
I mean, it works against lowest team. It works against lower, because we saw it in this Paris match where they were playing the Reaper Zarya, and it was looking kind of rough. But then as soon as they switched to the Doom comp, it was over. It was done.
Yeah, and so I think,
over.
And I think that's the thing is they knew, hey, you know, if we're starting to lose, we can bring out the Doomfist and we win. But it's worth trying these comps. So if anything, I'm just really happy that they were able to try out these team comps, the Zarya comp. And yeah, it looked really rough. And yeah, I hope they don't bring it out during the Kickoff Clash.
The problem is they have to bring it out, because the Doom comp is not going to work at the Kickoff Clash, except on very specific maps. It is loser's pick, but they're going to have to get better at the Zarya comp, because against Paris, like, Pelican and Lastro were just perpetually feeding, it seemed like, and they had a lot of issue with when they were using cooldowns, specifically like bubbles and nades. And like the way the Zarya comp like works, it's like if the enemy team doesn't have bubbles or nades and you do, you just rush them and just wipe them. And the Outlaws were not doing very good job at using those cooldowns properly outside of just feeding, because Pelican looked like he was always trying to make a play happen that didn't exist, and he was always getting caught out, and Lastro was always just caught on rotations or out of position. So they really need to be spending this week working on that comp, because if they cannot get the Zarya comp into a good shape, they're going to be 2 and out. They're just done.
Yeah.
They're going to get boomed out of the Kickoff Clash, because the Doom comp is not going to work against Dallas. It worked against Dallas, but it's not going to work again, especially in Dallas. It's like, you're not going to beat San Francisco. You're not going to beat Gladiators. You're not even going to be able to probably beat Atlanta with it.
Probably can't beat Florida with it.
Oh, I mean, they did beat Florida with it.
At this point.
At this point, probably not. So they need to get their act together with the Zarya comp. I hope that they're grinding it and working out these timings, because I really do want to see the Outlaws succeed in the tournament. I don't want this cycle of perpetual mediocrity to continue. I mean, the Outlaws have yet to win anything ever.
Yeah. But I just feel like this year they're struggling at figuring out their identity. You know, I think if they had another tank player, they'd be a little better off if they had a main tank player.
Yeah.
But I think just with the, you know, their roster being as restricted as it is, they're just struggling to figure out their place in this meta. And I think coming into the first few weeks, they had a little bit of a misread on the meta, and I think
it wasn't so much that they had a misread, it was that they did what they could with their circumstances, because they, unlike with Shock, they just had Kaluge learn main tank a little bit. They just kind of went, we don't know what's working, and they went, oh wait, this Doomfist comp works for us, and they were able to get by with it. So it wasn't so much they had a misread, it was that they came up with a band-aid solution for a problem that was in the moment. But if they don't figure something out moving forward for the rest of the season, they're going to have some serious problems.
Yeah.
And so, that worries me a little bit.
But yeah, I think that is what it is at this point. It'll be interesting to see if they adjust.
I have no idea. But I think it's time for some power rankings. Yeah, some week 4 power rankings. Let's start with APAC because it's easier. Fusion's yeah. I'm looking at I'm looking at the APAC rankings that we have, and really I think only 2 changes need to be made. I think Fusion dropped below Seoul, right, to be 4th best.
Yeah.
And then I think Valiant jumps Chengdu.
Yeah.
I think that's like it. Because I think Shanghai are still, until the thing with Shanghai is, even if Seoul and Spark are looking good, I think Shanghai are the best in APAC until proven otherwise. Because they got 3-0'd by Fusion, but then they weren't beat again by anybody else. So clearly they're still number 1. So until Spark or Dynasty are able to consistently beat Shanghai, Shanghai is the best in APAC. That's just how it is.
Yeah, I don't think there's any arguments to be made against those standings. I think, given with what we've seen, I think all the teams are put pretty much exactly where they need to be.
But now we go over to NA.
The West.
So
a little more interesting.
So the top 3, I think you could probably keep them, right? Shock, Fuel, Glads. There's the argument that Fuel could go above Shock, but I think they're about even, and Glads are number 3 because they lost to both of them.
So I think we just.
But then we look at this middle set. I think this tier break that we have between Justice and Spitfire, I think can go away, right?
Yeah.
So we move that. So Atlanta, I would throw definitely below Mayhem, right?
Yeah.
Rain moved down, and Spitfire, I would put. Do we put Spitfire above Washington and Toronto?
I would, because I feel like if anything,
they
this
look
last
better
week
than
shows
Toronto,
that they have more life than either of those teams.
Now,
I think, and London, they aren't going to take down a top team, but at least they
can take down.
They're pretty consistent. Well, and they're pretty consistent with it too. They're a lot more consistent than. The Justice. I don't see Spitfire losing against, Paris, Vancouver, or New York.
Yeah, no.
And I could see Washington throwing a game against one of those teams potentially.
Well, then what do we want to put Boston above Washington?
And that's the thing. Maybe
Because the problem is that we've only seen 2 games of Boston since they've leveled up. We saw their win, and then we saw them get curb stomped by the Fuel. But the game against the Fuel, it didn't look like they were a tragic team. They looked competitive. They were just outclassed. So
which is to be expected against the Fuel.
I would like if Boston and Washington played, unless Washington did their Washington thing and leveled up, like how Washington looked this weekend against Florida, Boston would have beaten that Washington team.
Yeah.
So I would say that Boston goes at least above Washington. Now, what about above Defiant? Like, yes, Defiant beat Boston. What was it? Last week in week 3?
Yeah,
but that was a
was
different
before Boston. Yeah, and so I think, and I mean, we honestly, I feel like I would still for now keep them below Toronto just because we haven't seen
enough
of them. But that being said, I think they're on the way up. I think Toronto and Washington are both on their way down.
Now I've just realized we've now put ourselves in a situation where London is below Atlanta. That can't be right. London is literally just beat that team. So London jumps up and top 6. See, you can't see the problem is you can't put them any higher because Florida would beat London and Outlaws literally just beat London. London doesn't go any higher than that, but
which I want to talk about Florida Houston.
So but see like the problem the thing with Florida is Florida would beat London, obviously. And current Florida would beat current Atlanta. Like and Florida would beat Boston, Washington, and Toronto.
Yeah.
But would current Florida beat Houston? I think there's an argument to be made that it would be close. I mean, it was already close to begin with, but I mean, Outlaws beat that Florida with the Doom comp.
Yeah.
So I'd say that Houston and Florida are about the same. They're probably the same level.
I think, like, on my personal standings, I would probably rate Florida a little higher. If they play each other during the tournament at all, I think Florida has slight advantage over them.
Mm-hmm. I think until we see them have a direct comparison.
Until we see it, I don't think it's worth moving.
Yeah, we can leave it. Now, Paris, New York, and Titans, I would say that Paris, after their performance against the Outlaws this week, I think earned spot number 11. I think they jumped New York.
Congrats, Paris.
Good job, Paris. You moved up 1 spot. You're still double digits, but
that being said,
progress.
The European teams as a whole are looking better than people had expected because
Paris is still 11th. I don't know about that one.
Which, yes,
like that was where we had them placed.
But I'm saying as a whole, European Overwatch is doing better than people expected because
London
going
is
into
carrying
the season,
all of that.
Yeah, of course.
So it's not European Overwatch; it's British Overwatch.
Although most of London is, they're from all over the place. I think
they are.
Yeah.
They are. But London specifically is doing way better than we thought they would. But we also didn't expect them to come in with the style that they did. And even if we knew coming into the season that they were going to play the Rhine comp, I don't think we would have thought they would have been good. Because Hadi last year was not very good. So he's having a straight up redemption arc this year.
Yeah.
So them being 6th after this weekend and not being in the Kickoff Clash is an actual robbery. London definitely should be in over Justice and Defiant.
Oh yeah, because and think about how beautiful it would be. I'm not saying they would win anything in the tournament,
no, they
wouldn't. But what if they did? Because tournaments have crazy stuff happen. You know?
Do,
and I don't think it would. But just to have that chance of something crazy happening where a Rhine team is competitive. Like, I think that would be amazing. What a storyline. And I'm just really disappointed with the story writers this year. They were so close to they were so close to perfection.
Oh, well, London are looking
almost
good.
As close to perfection as my potted plant.
Is it a fake potted plant?
Yeah, it's
like,
fake.
What?
You can go like this.
I wouldn't say that the script that it's as good. It's better than your fake potted plant. London Spitfire are better than
London
your fake.
didn't make it.
Yeah, but they're still ranked 6th. They're still top. they're still top half of NA.
Yeah,
But like
they didn't make it to the
problem
tournament.
is that London currently, they may be top of NA, but like that's probably as high as they're gonna be all season, unless
Yeah.
they have some kind of like super like rocky training arc. There's no way they're beating Florida or Houston, and definitely not beating those top three
No,
teams.
and I think, as a whole, the league is going to adjust to their play style.
Well,
Like,
and they probably going into the midseason tournament, they probably won't. That Rhine comp probably isn't going to be as effective with whatever
No.
changes come through. It probably won't work as well, and other teams will pick up whatever they need to. But just the fact they were able to get that far with cheesing, like exactly like 2019 Chengdu, like Chengdu was able to just pick some wins off of teams they shouldn't
well,
have.
and I think even just as a small thing, like I think one of the reasons why like London looked so good this week was Sparker on the soldier. And so I think even things like the soldier nerf, the Zen buff, like I think all of those things are going to hit London probably harder than anyone.
Yeah, most likely. So
but-
I would, unless we see otherwise, London is probably peaked.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, but I mean, they set themselves up well, finishing 3-3 after the first tournament with the same record as teams like Justice, and only one game back from teams like Outlaws, Mayhem, and Glads is nothing. That's nothing to slouch at.
Yeah.
I mean, they have the same record as the Philadelphia Fusion.
Yeah.
Which Fusion would walk all over the Spitfire,
Oh,
but
yeah.
that's not a comparison that we need to make.
That's that's unrelated.
So, but looking at this, do we want? I feel like there should be a tier break somewhere in this middle group, and I don't know where, because I don't think London can beat Florida and Houston, but I wouldn't say that Houston and Florida are a tier above teams like Atlanta and Toronto. So maybe London can be in that grouping, like we put put Houston, Florida, and London in their own grouping, and then have Atlanta, Toronto, Boston, Washington. So have like two.
But I think London could still lose to some of these teams. I would put the tier break above London.
Okay. Just have the Houston the Houston Mayhem zone.
Yeah, which I think is pretty accurate. I think the Mayhem and Outlaws are both very different teams, but I think they're both good enough that
I just the Outlaws are just so strange, because I mean they looked so tragic on that Zarya comp. And
and that's the thing. I think the Outlaws could fall. I think honestly this could be the peak of the Outlaws.
Well, if they get a better meta, if they get an off tank meta, which I mean, well, it is an off tank meta.
Yeah, and they look terrible on it.
Well, they don't practice it much, so I hope the Outlaws haven't peaked. But the Kickoff Clash is going to be telling for the Outlaws and how they do otherwise, because I don't really know how things are going to go, because that Doom comp has been figured out, and their Zarya comp against Paris was not very inspirational, so hopefully they're able to figure it out. But I think for now, until we see otherwise, the top three are still the top three. Houston and Florida didn't move, but at London, Atlanta, Toronto, Boston, Washington. What a lower middle group. That's so strange that London and Boston are in the same grouping as Washington and Atlanta.
Well, it's about time. Like, both Boston and London are teams that... Well, London, I've just been, simping
hyping
over
up all season. The fact that you don't have your own jersey, shame.
Yet. But I think, the Boston thing, I think it's kind of perfect that the week before they started looking better was right when I started ranting about
literally
them.
right after you ranted for them.
Yeah, but I've just got to say, like, it's about time, Boston. Like, they looked so bad at the beginning of the season, and things are definitely looking up for them. I think they're starting to play the way that they should be playing, and that's definitely good to see. And so I think good things are ahead for Boston. I don't think they've peaked. I think that it's only up from here for them.
Well, awesome. I think these power rankings are APAC. It looks to be a little more solid than NA. NA still has some teams that just refuse to show up on days.
Yeah.
I'm looking at you, Justice. But APAC, on the other hand, I feel like we have a pretty good idea of how the APAC pecking order sits, and we'll see how that translates into Kickoff Clash and the future tournaments when we get to the mid-season stuff. So, so for those of you wondering, we're going to do Kickoff Clash bracket predictions, but we're just going to do it as a separate video so that it's its own standalone thing, so that people who don't care about us ranting about previous week stuff can
Spitfire.
just yeah, there won't be any London Spitfire talk. Well, there might be, but only in reference to the teams playing. So
I've got to say, I'm definitely going to mention Spitfire.
So we'll be holding off on the bracket predictions for another video. It'll come out at the same time. It'll just be its own separate thing that you can watch on its own. So we're just
and if you came from here, came to hear from that video, then welcome.
Welcome that you've just jumped in. You've jumped in at the very end of the full video and not the half video.
Well, yeah.
Welcome to just jumping at the end. So because we're gonna do predictions separately, we're just gonna jump right into our play of the week, which there were a lot of funny, interesting moments this week. We had some Boostio Lucio dupes. We had a good number of 5Ks. We had, I swear, do you feel like there's been more C9s in the last 4 weeks than we've ever seen in that same time? I swear there have been so many.
Yeah, and I think it's because they have one less player to balance the touches off of, or they shrunk the things without telling us. I don't know.
It's there are so many, but
yeah, and it's always so close.
It's so
someone's
close.
about to touch, and then it's tragic.
But the play that we decided to go with this week is the triple boop on Lee J Gone Tower. More boops for the boop god. He just came over and just boop, off they go.
Yeah, and first fight of the match, he just goes over. I'm gonna do some booping today.
He also got the extra. He got a quad. He almost got the quint, but then who are you came in and stole?
Who are you stole the last kill? So tragic.
So tragic.
It's like the Patapan.
The Patapan
quadra kill, and then
But it was just. I mean, there were a lot of good plays this week, but I feel like this one is just it's not a 5K of a dragon of a nano blade. It's just a Lucio doing things on his map. Lee J Gone Tower.
And it's one of those things that, if you ever feel bad that you get booped off by a Lucio at the beginning of a match,
just remember that it was Lee J Gone doing it on his map.
Just remember Lee J Gong did it too. It was beautiful.
Against professional players. He did it too. He got 3.
Oh, yeah.
And then you think back to last year, we had 8 or 9 on the whole map.
Oh, yeah.
It's insane.
Insane.
So,
what a beast.
Great plays this week. Terrible plays. Lots of spaghetti droppage. But it was a good final week of matches, and we're excited. Looking forward to the Kickoff Clash. It's going to be in Dallas. It's going to be live, and we will be at our homes or watching it from a computer.
Looking at my potted plant.
Well, thank you everybody for watching. We'll hope you enjoy the Kickoff Clash this week, and we hope you enjoy the predictions video, or already did enjoy the predictions video, whichever order you did it in. So enjoy the Kickoff Clash, and we will catch you next week with a review of that tournament, as it's probably going to be full of a lot of good stuff. So
crazy stuff.
We'll catch you all later.